Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Braggin' Boldly, where we're talking about how to survive a layoff without totally losing your mind. Braggin' Boldly is a weekly event hosted by Braggin' Right and myself, Morgan McCoy, CEO and owner of Braggin' Right. And every week we talk about, we tell stories and provide education around the topics of equity, work, leadership, and getting yourself paid. And today's topic is particularly important when it comes to that, because what happens when you lose all of your money, when you potentially lose a job? That is a very stressful prospect, but one that is likely coming for us all at some point. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started here today. So I am your host, Morgan McCoy. I introduced myself already, but I am joined by the lovely and incredible Katie Jenkins, who is a product director, a leader, and all-around badass. Katie has been a mentor of mine for a very long time, and I'm so glad to have her on today. Hey, Katie, you want to come on and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. And I echo your badassness. You're amazing. And I'm so excited for you to be doing this because you have a lot to offer. And I can definitely tell folks listening that you've pushed me a few times to do things that I should be doing and bragging for myself. So thank you so much. As way of introduction, like Morgan said, I'm a product director currently, although I've flip-flopped a lot in different roles. I've had customer success and tech roles. I'm currently based in Seattle and see myself as an ever-evolving human that is trying to make a living in the best, honest way possible.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to have you here today. And kind of without further ado, we're going to jump into the topic of today's conversation, which is that topic of layoffs. I know you yourself have experienced layoffs in the past, but actually, before we get into that, I want to start with one question, and that is, can you share a time when an employer has prioritized profits over your well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think since we are on the topic of layoffs, I want to first acknowledge that I fully understand that at times businesses really have no other option to stay afloat than to reduce their workforce costs. And I don't fault organizations for making tough decisions about reducing their talent. I've been actually on both sides of the equation. I have planned and executed reductions in force, and then I've also been personally affected by a reduction in force. So saying all of that, my personal story that I'll tell is a time when I felt like my well-being was being deprioritized and a short-term balance sheet decision was being made. I worked for an employer and the certain leadership team at the time decided to invest in my contribution to the business. They paid for me to relocate. They increased my salary. They were giving me very high performance reviews and everything was great. And I was very happy with how the relationship was going, the business relationship. And then a change in leadership happened, which along with the people that changed, the values and the goals of the company also changed quite dramatically. And that leadership group decided that my contributions were no longer needed. And so my headcount was reduced. And at first, I really took it as a narrative on my own self-worth and future career potential. A few years later now, in retrospect, I know that that decision had very little actually to do with my contributions and my worth, and more about the leadership decisions that were being made and the shift in overall business values from the new 3 people that had come in.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can take us back to that day when you were experiencing that riff, the emotions flooding your veins. You need to kind of navigate this, we'll call it a career change. What were the actions that you took that day to prepare for severance negotiations, but also support yourself emotionally?
Yeah, I mean, I always get shivers when somebody asks me to go back to that day because honestly, I just crumbled. I emotionally didn't realize how much my self-worth was attached to my professional career achievements. And I saw this decision from a company as a complete narrative on my personal and professional worth to any company. So the fact that 3 leaders at a small company decided that they didn't need my contributions anymore turned into me, my whole successful background career just being worthless in my head. Also on that day though, while I was struggling emotionally, I compartmentalized that from what I needed to do with the company. I knew that I legally and just from a business perspective had to negotiate my severance with the company. And I fully understood at that point even that me coming into the conversation with the business to negotiate my severance was helpful. It was not going to be helpful for me to come in emotionally. It was going to be helpful and advance both my interests and the company's interests, honestly, to come in and treat this as a business interaction, make it very factual, and realize that the people that I was dealing with at that point, which was HR, weren't the ones that made the decision to reduce my headcount. And so it was in my best interest to respect their role, stay professional, keep them as an ally as I approached any negotiations that I wanted to do with the severance agreement that was put in front of me.
With that severance agreement, what were some of the key things that you made sure to negotiate for that may or may not have already been written into that contract?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's a pretty personal answer, meaning that each person that you ask that question to is going to have a different answer because it really depends on the values that you have in this transition. So for me, I was and still am the key financial provider for my family. My priority was to make sure that we could continue on and be financially stable and have healthcare coverage, and that my future rights to be employed were allowed as part of the agreement. So when you look at a severance agreement, it's really important not only to make sure you understand what's included, but what you maybe don't want included that is in the boilerplate template. For example, my initial agreement had a non-compete language, and my whole background is in the same industry and the same product line as the company. And so I had them remove that non-compete language so that I could have a healthy career potential moving forward.
Yeah. What other kind of thoughts did you have around the legal ramifications? Did you end up working with a lawyer or did you kind of do it all yourself?
I personally had a friend who is a lawyer. I did not invest in paying an employment lawyer to review. I think if you have a case for why you would want to invest in paying a lawyer for this, it's definitely something that you could do. So I personally had a friend that looked at it and gave me some ideas. What I would recommend to folks who don't have a lawyer contact, because if you have a lawyer contact, they're going to go through and tell you all of the things that they've seen in their past and what you can and can't do, and they'll be very lawyer-ish, right? If you don't have that access, what you can do is think about it as a business transaction, because that at the end of the day, that's what it is. Even though I was super emotional, even though I was in scarcity mindset and my mind was going crazy about how I was going to support my family going forward. It only helped me to think about the negotiation as a business discussion and think about it from the other person's side. And so again, like outside of the legal language, it makes sense to think about this as a negotiation of give and take. So if you're going to ask for something different than what's in the original agreement, figure out like what you can give back to the company or to the other party that you're negotiating with. So if you don't necessarily care as much about healthcare, maybe you're in your 20s, you're super healthy, you're fine to take the risk of not having healthcare for a few months, but you need a little bit more cash. You could think about giving and taking there. You can also think about non-financial language that's in there. So maybe you give up some of your future rights, or maybe you ask for those in exchange for less money. It's really thinking about this as business transaction versus me versus them.
Yeah. You really emphasize this point of this being a business transaction, and that's a wonderful like mindset to come to this like moment in your career with. However, I know you're also dealing with that like gut punch of like, oh, I've got to find a new job. All of a sudden, my future looks much more uncertain now than it did this morning. How did you handle the emotional ramifications of this layoff?
Yeah, again, I mean, I didn't handle it well at first. I mean, I think that's okay, right? Like I think it's okay to crumble. It's okay to like just sit on the bed and cry for a couple days. And then once you get over the initial shock of it emotionally, I personally went to my peace place, which my peace place is in the mountains. It's in hiking, it's in just being in nature. And I did that to reflect and learn about how I could take control of my own self-confidence and my own self-worth. And so I pretty quickly recognized that there was a problem. I was way too attached to my career achievements from a personal standpoint, and that I was allowing that to define me as a human. And I invested in intense therapy. I read all of the self-help books, listened to all the podcasts that I possibly could. And I know that really sounds cliche, but I do think that a layoff is a really good example of one of those breaking points in a lot of people's lives where something that you didn't expect to happen happened. And if you can lean into that experience and really think about how to use it as a learning opportunity, you'll only come out ahead.
Yeah, that supports some research that I've read recently that shows that people who have been laid off actually make more money in the future and are more likely to quit their own jobs in the future if they're unsatisfied with them. I'm curious to hear, how has this layoff shaped how you think about work now?
Great question. I would say I am very aligned with the research that you quoted. I am now, again, I did a lot of work understanding my own self-worth outside of a specific company job title. And because of that, and I think that probably a lot of people who go through this are doing some of the same things. Because of that, I know my worth now. And I know that I've proven to myself that I can get another job and I can be valuable to another company. And so the way that I show up now in my job is a lot different from where I was before. I'm way less loyal to a company if I don't feel like they are recognizing my contributions in the way that they should. And I also am more proactive while I'm in a job to think about like, what are those next steps? I have my resume ready all of the time. So my resume is like ready to go no matter what, just in case. You never know when you're going to share an elevator with somebody who's interested in what you do and says, shoot me a resume, let's talk. I find this hard to believe because we're in such a digital age right now, but the resume is still your gateway in no matter what. So having that ready is super crucial.
Yeah, we'll do a shameless plug here for Brag and Write. If your resume is out of date at all, even by just a couple of months, it can take a lot of time, as Katie had said, to update that resume, especially when you're in this headspace of loss and thinking back and thinking like, oh, what accomplishments did I have in this career or in this position? What experiences did I have? So if you're looking to have your resume up to date and have a partner in that updating, then Brag and Write could be a wonderful individual or business to turn to. So check us out at bragandwrite.com if you're interested in getting a resume review. But coming back to you, Katie, I loved your comment around resumes and especially around navigating into the next opportunity, because rifts are never the end of our careers, right? It's a dark moment in time that it can certainly feel destabilizing, but there has to be a next thing, right? So as you think about, or as you thought about, I went through this experience, I need to move forward. How did you start to find opportunities for yourself?
Yep. This might not be the answer you're expecting, but I actually didn't have to do a lot of proactive work after I found out I was laid off, because I had unknowingly been doing work while I was employed. And in retrospect, I think it's really important for all of us to do something similar, maybe on a little bit more on the proactive side. What I mean by that is when you are comfortable in a role and you're doing great, and you have some extra time where you're not in that scarcity mindset, when you do your best work, when you have really great output, when you're building your network, you are unknowingly building opportunities for yourself in the future. My personal experience was within 2 or 3 days of me myself learning that I was laid off, I had 2 calls in asking to talk about a job offer. And so I thinking about that experience now, I am now very proactive in planning what my next steps are, networking with the right people. And I also wanted to double down on this idea of a board of directors. And a board of directors is important in a lot of different ways because they are your 3 to 5 people in your life that you can trust with anything, that you can show up raw, authentic to, really talk through your experience, and then also plan for your next step. And hopefully they can also help you network if you pick the right board of directors.
Yeah, I think that network is so important, especially when it comes to having people that you can react to in the moment of career transition when it comes to riffs. A lot of riffs often include a gag order or a line around like not being able to discuss what had happened as a part of that riff. How did you navigate the potential like social isolation when it came to that gag order?
Yeah, and my agreement did have that. And I know that I was actually really excited to see that there's some legislation being put in place now in certain states to not allow that type of language. And for those of you that don't know what this is, it's almost boilerplate language in every severance agreement that says in exchange for a severance payment and any financial gain that you're getting from this severance, that you will not deface the company in public and even in private, like with your friends. And so you run the risk, and it's written very very strongly, and it can be really scary to read. And so you run the risk of losing or having to owe back the money that you've been paid on your severance. And I had that in my agreement, and there was no negotiating it out. I mean, it was just kind of accepted. And I think if that exists, again, I go back to that board of directors, right? It is a pretty isolating event, and having trusted resources that you can kind of vent to and be authentic with is really important in this case. And everybody has their own opinion on social media. I think it makes sense to think first before you react. And maybe write it in a Word document that no one sees. Write all of your reactions and feelings and thoughts in a Word document that no one sees, with maybe with the intention of posting later, but let it sit for a few days. And maybe run it past those board of directors and see what they think. And odds are that you can find an outlet for your emotions and for your personal reactions outside of something that would set you up for risk of losing your severance payments.
Yeah. Journaling is such a wonderful like point there. You know, you're navigating all of these emotions, putting them out into a place where it's not social media, where no one's going to read it, is a really wonderful idea, so that you can come to that negotiation table from a business mindset, prepared to demand what you're worth, and supported with the knowledge of your experiences. Katie, I'm wondering if you could go back and kind of like go back to that day and have all of the knowledge that you've gained over the last couple of years, is there anything that you would do differently?
Yeah, there is. I think one, I've thought about what went wrong right at the organization. So when I'm at an organization and the mission changes or leadership changes, I would be more proactive in networking with those new leaders, better understanding what the shift is, and understanding myself if I can contribute to that new mission, and then socializing it instead of just going business as usual and trusting that things will take care of themselves. I would be more proactive.
Yeah.
outside of the organization and like when I'm dealing in dealing with actually like after the layoff, the thing I would do differently is take more time to, as financially possible, right? Like people have to feed their kids. I had to feed my kids. Take more time to better understand where my passions were and where I actually wanted to go, instead of just operating again from this scarcity mindset of like, I have to make money immediately. And think outside of the box of how to make money immediately if I actually need to, which I did. I mean, honestly, like I had to pretty quickly start making money again. What I wish I would have done is not jumped directly to a next career move. I wish I would have found other sources of income like contracting work that could supplement, but not be like an official part of my resume moving forward.
Yeah. That's a really great point, is like finding those other avenues for yourself in that moment of transition rather than forcing your hand into the next opportunity. I wonder now if you can kind of close us out on, as we ourselves lead at companies, how can we make sure that the companies that we work for handle rifts with as much empathy as possible when they are required from a business perspective?
Great question. And again, like I said, I have been on the side of planning and executing a reduction in force. And I think it's very important for the people planning reductions in force to remember that everybody is a human with a life and with a trust in this organization that they're working for. And they're not just a number on a spreadsheet that looks good when you press delete, right? Because you're pressing delete on somebody's sense of worth, potentially. You're pressing delete on somebody's financial gain, sure. And so handle it as if it was you in the seat. Don't send an email with a notification. Don't just stop inviting the employee to meetings without an explanation. Like, make sure that you're respecting the person and approaching it as if you were the one in the seat being told that your headcount was being reduced.
Yeah. I think handling the situation with empathy and remembering that like we're humans, both people going through rifts and people negotiating rifts from the business perspective. We are all humans, and when we handle each other as humans and with empathy and thoughtfulness, then things can be a lot easier, or at least somewhat easier. Going through a riff or going through a layoff is always going to be a painful experience, but it's less painful when handled tactically and respectfully, as opposed to being fired via Twitter or some of the other approaches that we've seen tech companies take in the last couple of months. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. As an action item for our audience today, I'd love to encourage everybody to identify their own board of directors. Think of those lists of 3 people who are the folks that you can turn to in any situation. Maybe they're mentors, maybe they're friends, maybe they're old coworkers, but these should be people that you trust to have your back, and that when you share something that's not necessarily going to spread out to other people, and that you trust to elevate your career, and in turn you can help elevate them as well. So think about those maybe 3 folks who could be your board of directors. And thank you just everyone so much again for joining. I'm going to share here again. We do have an opportunity for our customers here. This May, Brag and Write is running a $100 resume review opportunity. This includes alignment of resumes to a specific targeted job description, making sure that applicant tracking systems won't spit out your resume. Actually, 75% of resumes are never viewed by a recruiter these days. They get automatically kind of deleted by applicant tracking systems. So make sure that's not happening to you. And then as a part of this resume review, you'll get action items and feedback to make sure your skills, experience, and general badassery are shouted from the rooftops whenever you apply to jobs. With that, we're going to go ahead and close out. Thank you everybody for joining. Katie, thank you so much for your brilliance and empathy and just sharing your story with us here today. We're so excited to see where you go. And I know that your words of wisdom will be impactful for many other people. You're welcome, or everybody is welcome to follow Katie at Katie Jenkins on LinkedIn, but you can also find Brag and Write all over the internet, where we have a website, we're on Etsy, Facebook, Instagram, etc. This video will be available on YouTube, just as every recording of every Brag and Boldly event is. And if you enjoyed the session and you have any feedback, feel free to submit that feedback via our QR code. Thank you everybody for joining again today. Katie, we'll see you soon, huh?
Yes.
All right. Thanks everybody.